She wore pearls like armor. He gave up his seat without knowing who she was, just that she looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. What he didn't know was that she wasn't just a stranger. She was the CEO of the very airline they were flying on. And that one quiet act of kindness would unravel everything she thought she knew about love loss and what it means to land again. If stories of unexpected grace and quiet redemption move, you make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because this journey begins in seat 24B, but where it ends might just change the way you see everything. The snow had fallen steadily for hours, blanketing the small Tacoma neighborhood in a hush that only winter knew how to bring. Sawyer Quinn stood in the kitchen, watching the kettle rattle just slightly as steam hissed through its narrow spout. It was his signal. Lila would be home soon. He turned off the burner and poured hot water over 2 chamomile tea bags, one for himself, one for his daughter. The mugs were mismatched, like most things in their small home. His said, "World's okayest dad," a gift from Lila, now chipped along the rim. Hers had faded sunflowers and the faintest lipstick print from the last time her mother had used it almost a year ago. He didn't throw it out. Couldn't. The front door creaked open before he could call out. Lila came in snowflakes tangled in her braids, her cheeks flushed red, and her mittens soaked through. "It's freezing," she said, stomping the snow off her boots like a miniature lumberjack. Sawyer handed her the warm mug. "Drink up, Snow Queen. You'll melt in no time." She grinned and climbed onto the stool at the counter. "Mr. Murphy's porch light is still on. It's been on all day." Sawyer paused. "Are you sure?" "Yeah. And there's no footprints, not even bird ones." He frowned and looked out the kitchen window toward the house next door. The porch light was on, the curtains drawn. And she was right. The snow on the walkway lay undisturbed. Sawyer's gut tightened. Something wasn't right. He grabbed his coat and nodded to Lila. "Stay here. I'm coming too." "No." Her eyes narrowed. "You always say we look out for neighbors." He hesitated, then sighed. "All right. Bundle up. Stay behind me." They crossed through knee-deep snow, the wind biting at their faces. Sawyer knocked hard. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. Then he saw it, just a flicker of movement through the side window. He tried the doorknob. Unlocked. The heat inside was barely working. A faint radio played Frank Sinatra, and in the dim light of the kitchen, Sawyer found Mr. Murphy slumped against the cabinet, his breathing shallow. A blanket was draped over a still form on the couch, his wife Joyce, her face pale, her hands folded across her chest. "Oh, God," Sawyer murmured. He knelt beside Mr. Murphy. "Sir, can you hear me?" Murphy's eyelids fluttered. His lips were cracked. She passed. I didn't know what to do." Sawyer gently touched his shoulder. "You did what you could. I've got you now." He called 911. While waiting, he found a clean dish towel, dampened it with warm water, and placed it on Murphy's forehead. He checked his pulse, not strong, but steady. Lila stood quietly by the doorway, her small body tense. Then, in that way, only children know how to do. She walked slowly to the couch and sat beside the late Mrs. Murphy, pulling out a folded piece of paper from her pocket. A poem, one she'd written for school. She began to read. "The sky is not empty, it's just hiding hands that once tied your shoes and wiped crumbs from your face. The stars are not strangers, but echoes and friends of voices and laughter that once filled this place." Tears welled up in Sawyer's eyes. When the paramedics arrived, they moved swiftly. Mr. Murphy was taken to the hospital. They respectfully confirmed what Sawyer already knew about Joyce. That night, the house next door felt hollow in a way that lingered. 2 weeks later, Mr. Murphy returned home, thinner, quieter, but standing. Sawyer helped shovel his driveway and refused thanks. "It's what neighbors do," he said simply. But Murphy didn't forget. On an unusually bright morning in March, the old man came to Sawyer's door. In his hands, a sealed envelope. "These were meant for Joyce and me," he said, voice cracking slightly. "We were going to New York for our 50th anniversary. Fancy seats. But well, I think they belong to you and Lila now." Sawyer opened the envelope and blinked. 2 first-class plane tickets, round trip, Seattle to New York. "I can't accept this," Sawyer began. "Yes, you can," Murphy said, "because you saved my life. And more than that, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" The old man smiled softly. "That kindness still matters. That maybe the world isn't as cold as it seems." Sawyer looked down at the tickets, then back at the man. The snow was beginning to melt outside. Spring, it seemed, was trying its best to return. And in that moment, with the envelope in his hand and Lila giggling behind the screen door, Sawyer felt the first flutter of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The morning of the flight, the sky hung low with clouds, one of those soft gray blankets that made the world feel like it hadn't fully woken up yet. Sawyer stood in the kitchen, stuffing Lila's favorite peanut butter crackers and sketchbook into her backpack. She bounced in place near the door, wearing her polka-dot travel hoodie and oversized headphones around her neck. "Do we really get to sit in the fancy seats, Dad?" He smiled, zipping her bag. "Looks that way." The tickets from Mr. Murphy had felt almost surreal. Sawyer had folded them carefully into an old envelope and tucked them away for weeks, half expecting a phone call to revoke them. But none came. Instead, the older man only stopped by now, and then, with banana bread or handwritten stories, he said Lila inspired him to write. Sawyer hadn't flown in nearly a decade, not since before his wife Meredith had passed. Life had become landlocked after her death. But the cardiologist in New York specialized in rare cases like Lila's. It was the kind of care he couldn't ignore. And the tickets, well, they felt like a door opening, one that didn't require kicking down. "Do I have to act fancy?" Lila asked as they drove to the airport, her feet barely touching the floor of the passenger seat. Sawyer chuckled. "Just be yourself, Peanut. That's more than fancy enough." At the terminal, he guided Lila through security, his hand never leaving her shoulder. He scanned the crowd for their gate number, clutching the envelope with the boarding passes like it was something sacred. It wasn't until they stood at gate B24 that the reality of first class truly sank in. The boarding agent smiled as she scanned their tickets. First class seats, A and 1B, right up front. Lila gave a theatrical gasp. "We're in row 1, I didn't even know numbers went that low." Passengers turned to look at her, a few smiling at her wonder. Sawyer gently nudged her forward, trying not to laugh. Inside the cabin, everything felt different, softer, quieter, more distant from the rest of the world. The seats were wide and buttery, smooth, the windows larger. Flight attendants greeted them by name. Lila immediately curled up in her seat, with her sketchbook feet tucked under her like a cat. Sawyer glanced around, trying to suppress the feeling that he didn't belong here. And then she appeared. A woman in her early 40s, tall and graceful with soft eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses and a pearl necklace that seemed older than she was. Her coat was simple charcoal gray, her posture a blend of poise and exhaustion. She stood in the aisle, glancing down at her ticket, then back up. She looked pale, a little lost. The flight attendant approached her and whispered something, pointing toward the rear cabin. Her lips thinned. She looked nauseated. Sawyer caught her eyes for a fleeting second. There was pain there, not the physical kind, something deeper. Without thinking, he stood. "Ma'am," he said gently. "You okay?" She blinked as if surprised someone had addressed her kindly. "I get airsick near the rear of the plane. It's worse near the engines. I asked if I could be moved, but the flight's full." Sawyer looked at Lila, who had just started drawing a duck in a top hat. She was humming quietly to herself. He turned back to the woman. "I'll trade with you," he said simply. "You can take my seat." Her eyes widened. "No, I couldn't possibly. This is first class." "That's—" He shrugged. "It's a seat. You look like you need it more than I do." For a moment, she looked as if she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded slowly, her hand touching her pearl necklace, as if grounding herself. "Thank you," she whispered. Sawyer leaned down to Lila. "Hey, kiddo, we're going to sit farther back, okay?" She looked up at him. "Why?" "Because someone needs this seat more than we do." Lila studied the woman for a moment, then grinned. "Okay. Can I still draw ducks?" "Always." They gathered their things and made their way down the aisle. The woman settled into seat 1B, looking shell-shocked. She watched the two of them walk away until they disappeared into the rows. In economy, Sawyer settled into a window seat with Lila beside him. The cabin felt tighter, noisier, but somehow more familiar. Lila pulled out a fresh cookie from her travel pouch, one she had saved from Mr. Murphy's last visit, and broke it in half. "You should have given it to the lady," she said, offering him a piece. He smiled. "I think she needed the seat more than the cookie." Lila nodded seriously. She looked sad. "Like, her clouds are too heavy." Sawyer looked out the window as the plane pushed back from the gate. "Yeah," he said, quietly. She did. Somewhere up front, Celeste Renford sat in the seat she hadn't paid for, tears stinging behind her eyes. Her mother's funeral was in less than 12 hours. The last voicemail still sat on her phone unopened. She had been too late. But the stranger, the man who had looked at her, not with suspicion, but with something like kindness, had shifted something inside her. She looked down at the seatbelt and whispered almost to herself. "I don't even know his name." The hum of the aircraft dulled to a low vibration as they ascended through the clouds. Outside the window, the gray sky blurred into soft streaks of white and silver. Inside, seat 1B, Celeste Renford sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes unfocused. The leather of the first-class seat was warm, almost comforting, but it could not quiet the storm in her chest. Her mother's pearls rested cool and familiar against the hollow of her throat. She hadn't taken them off since that call. "You should come now," the nurse had said gently. "She's asking for you." But Celeste had been late. Late for the first and final time. It had taken 3 security briefings, 2 diverted board meetings, and a pair of phone calls to cancel a press event just to get her on this flight. None of that mattered now. Her mother had died the night before. Not as CEO of Renair, not as a titan of aviation. Just her mother. Viola May Renford. The woman who'd once handed out pretzels and ginger ale to nervous flyers, who had taught Celeste that kindness didn't need a title to be valid. Celeste's hands trembled, and she clenched them tighter. The man Sawyer, she'd heard someone call him that, had given up his seat without a second thought. He hadn't known who she was. That was the point. He had looked at her like a person, not a title, not a problem. And the girl, that child, with the braid and the sketchbook. Her smile had been real. Free. Not filtered through press or formality. Celeste blinked hard and reached into her purse, pulling out a packet of tissues. As she dabbed at the corners of her eyes, a warm voice interrupted her thoughts. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" the flight attendant asked. She swallowed. "Water, please. Just water." The attendant returned with a glass of sparkling water, and placed a single biscotti on the napkin beside it. Celeste stared at it a moment. "Do you know the name of the man who switched seats?" she asked quietly. The attendant hesitated. "I believe his name was Sawyer Quinn. He's traveling with a little girl, his daughter, I think." Celeste nodded. The name settled in her memory like a pebble dropped into still water. Sawyer Quinn. She would remember it. Meanwhile, in the economy cabin, Sawyer shifted slightly, adjusting his long legs under the tray table. Lila had curled up beside him with her sketchbook on her lap, and was now busy drawing the view outside their tiny window. "Do you think clouds are like pillows for angels?" she asked without looking up. "Probably," Sawyer replied, smiling. "And sometimes, maybe just hiding spots." She paused. "That lady needed a hiding spot, huh?" "Yeah," he said softly. "I think she did." There was a stillness in Lila when she spoke like that, a knowing that surpassed her 10 years. Sometimes it reminded Sawyer of Meredith, not in appearance, but in that quiet way of noticing people without them realizing. "I gave her one of Mr. Murphy's cookies," she said suddenly, "before we left." Sawyer blinked. "You did?" Lila nodded. "She looked like she needed it more than I did." He smiled. "That was very kind of you. I didn't tell her it had raisins, though. Is that bad?" Sawyer laughed. A real full laugh. People around them turned slightly, but he didn't care. For a moment, the heaviness in his chest eased. The flight touched down in New York just after sunset. The city lights glittered against the dusk, like scattered gold coins, indifferent and mesmerizing all at once. As passengers filed off the plane, Celeste lingered at the front cabin door, watching each person exit. She hoped without admitting it that she might see them again. The father and daughter. But they had exited early, she realized. From the rear. Quietly. As they had come. She felt something odd. An ache of gratitude mixed with incompleteness, like a thank you left unsaid. Still time moved, and so did she. Sawyer and Lila stepped into the brisk New York evening with their small suitcase and a handwritten map from their motel's website. The city buzzed with cabs, crosswalks, and lives rushing past. Lila clutched his hand as they navigated the sidewalk. "Do you think we'll see her again?" she asked. Sawyer glanced down. "I don't know. Maybe she was an angel." He smiled, though a part of him wondered the same. 3 blocks away, Celeste entered the funeral home alone. The hallway smelled of eucalyptus and soft linen. Photos of her mother lined the wall, framed in gentle light. There was one from the 1960s, Viola May in uniform, handing a drink to a little boy on a flight. Her smile genuine, unhurried. Celeste stood before it and whispered, "I did everything wrong." A quiet voice echoed inside her. "You didn't forget to be kind. That's what matters." She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumbled napkin. A cookie had once been folded inside. It was gone now, eaten mid-flight, but the sweetness remained. A child's gift, a stranger's seat, a moment that asked nothing and yet gave everything. That night, Celeste sat alone in her hotel suite, still dressed in black. The city pulsed beneath her windows. She opened her laptop, the Renair dashboard blinking to life. In a small, tucked-away folder, labeled Pending Initiatives, she created a new file. Skykind, a pilot program for compassion first flying. She typed the title, paused, then added a note beneath. Inspired by 2 passengers I never truly met. She closed the laptop and looked out at the skyline. For the first time in months, the shadows didn't feel so heavy. Celeste sat motionless in the back of the town car as it moved slowly through the Upper East Side. The passing streetlights threw golden bands of light across her lap, then faded into shadows. New York, as always, moved on loud, unapologetic, oblivious to personal grief. But inside Celeste, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not like a bolt of lightning. It was quieter. like the sound of snow falling on glass. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. The cookie was gone, eaten long before her mother's viewing, but the scent lingered, faintly brown sugar cinnamon. And something else. Childhood. Innocence, maybe. Something warm. The little girl had handed it to her wordlessly just before leaving the first-class cabin. No grand gesture, just a child with kind eyes and frosting on her fingers. Celeste hadn't eaten all day, but the cookie had tasted like comfort, not gourmet comfort. Real comfort, the kind that came from a kitchen that loved its people, across the city in a modest motel room with floral curtains and a heater that ticked every 5 minutes. Sawyer sat at the edge of the bed, his laptop balanced on one knee, while Lila curled up next to him, watching an old animated movie on mute. He wasn't really reading the email on the screen. His mind kept returning to the woman from the plane. There was something about the look in her eyes, not just exhaustion, but a kind of lostness he recognized all too well. He'd seen it in the mirror after Meredith died. That hollow, drifting look of someone untethered. People thought grief made you cry all the time. It didn't. Mostly, it just made the world too quiet. Sawyer closed the laptop and turned to Lila. "You okay, Peanut?" She nodded, eyes still on the screen. "The beds smell like soup." He laughed. "That's oddly specific." "I like it," she said. "It smells like stories." Sawyer tucked a blanket around her. "Did I ever tell you that you're the wisest person I know?" Lila yawned. "You did. After I said ketchup was just tomato jam. Still true." They shared a quiet moment, the room humming with tired peace. The next morning, Celeste stood at the glass doors of Renair's Manhattan headquarters. From the outside, the building was a polished marvel of steel and reflection. Inside, it often felt more like a war room than a workplace. Stockholders, reporters, public expectations all pressing at once. She stepped into the executive elevator and rode alone to the 28th floor. When the doors opened, her assistant Mia was already waiting. "You're not supposed to be in today," Mia said, offering a warm smile and a strong coffee. "I wasn't supposed to miss my mother's funeral either," Celeste replied, accepting the cup. Mia hesitated, unsure whether to press further, then decided against it. "There's something I thought you should see. It came in this morning through the customer feedback line." Celeste arched an eyebrow. "Those rarely include good news. This one's different." Maya handed over a printout. Celeste read silently. "Dear Renair, my name is Lila Quinn. I'm 10. I was on your plane yesterday from Seattle. My dad gave his seat to a lady with a pearl necklace because she looked sad. I gave her my last cookie. It had raisins. I hope she liked it. It's from our neighbor who we helped when his wife died. He used to be sad too. I hope the lady is okay. Please tell her thank you for being real." It wasn't signed like a complaint or even a compliment, just a note, from one soul to another. Celeste swallowed hard. She hadn't told anyone at the airline about the switch. She hadn't planned to. But somehow, this little girl had reached across a crowded plane and unknowingly tapped the very nerve Celeste had spent years guarding. Real. That was the word that struck her deepest. Thank you for being real. She stared at the paper a long while before folding it gently and tucking it into her inner blazer pocket. "Can you find out where they're staying?" she asked softly. "Sawyer Quinn. He's with his daughter Lila." Mia blinked. "Do you want me to contact them?" "No," Celeste said. "Just let me know where they are." Mia nodded and left. Celeste stood alone in her office, surrounded by glass walls, high ceilings, and furniture that cost more than most people made in a month. And yet what stayed with her, what grounded her, was a cookie and a child's letter. Back at the motel, Lila was finishing her drawing of the airplane. This time, she'd added 2 stick figures in row 1A and 1B, one tall one with a braid. A little heart floated between them. Underneath, she scrawled, Kindness flies faster than planes. She handed it to her dad. Should we mail it to the airline? Sawyer looked at the picture, his throat tightening unexpectedly. Yeah, he said. Yeah, we should. He folded the drawing, carefully tucking it into the same envelope as the thank you letter Lila had written the night before. They walked together to the front desk and asked for a stamp. At Renair, the letter and drawing arrived in a plain envelope 3 days later. Celeste opened it herself. She stared at the picture, her thumb tracing the tiny heart between the two drawn figures. And for the first time in years, she smiled without thinking about cameras, investors, or outcomes. Just smiled. Celeste sat at her office window sipping coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The skyline was a jagged line of confidence and ambition, but her mind wasn't in it. Not today. The folded drawing sat in front of her on the desk. Lila's sketch, 2 stick figures seated side by side in first class. A heart floating between them was both simple and devastating. It carried more sincerity than 1,000 quarterly reports, more purpose than the dozen business books shelved behind her. She had read Lila's letter 6 times that morning. Still, it surprised her each time. Not just the words, but the clarity of them. That a 10-year-old could see the soul behind a stranger's eyes and label it real. Celeste wasn't sure whether it filled her with hope or shame. She had once been that kind of person too. Celeste opened her laptop and clicked through to Renair's internal innovation platform, a place where future initiatives and outreach programs were proposed and archived, often with little follow-through. But today, she didn't want this one to get buried. She created a new project folder, Project Skykin, a compassion-based passenger initiative. She began typing, her fingers slower than usual, not because she wasn't sure what to write, but because for the first time in years, the stakes felt human. Inspired by an anonymous act of kindness on Flight 443, a man and his daughter gave up their first-class seats to a woman they didn't know. In a time when travel feels increasingly cold, impersonal, and transactional, this moment reminded us that our airline was built not just on flight routes, but on human stories. Real ones. Let's return to that. She leaned back in her chair, but something still pulled at her. The child. The father. Their names were in the system, now Sawyer and Lila Quinn. Mia had found them easily enough given the flight records. They were staying in a modest motel in Queens, likely while attending medical appointments, based on Sawyer's recent call to update their travel extension. Celeste hesitated, then reached for a fresh sheet of stationery. She wasn't going to send a press release or official letter. No marketing language, just her own words in her own hand. Dear Mr. Quinn, I don't know if you remember me, but I was the woman you gave your seat to on Flight 443. You didn't know who I was, and that's exactly what made your kindness feel so rare and so real. I wanted to say thank you, not just for the seat, but for the quiet grace in how you gave it, and for raising a daughter whose small act of sharing a cookie reminded me of things I had forgotten. You changed more than my flight that day. You changed something in me. If your time allows, I'd love to invite you and Lila to visit our Renair Outreach Center here in New York. We're developing a new initiative inspired by moments like yours, and I believe your voice could help shape it. With gratitude, C. Renford. She signed only her initial and surname, no title, no formality. If he chose to Google her, he'd know. But she didn't want the invitation to come with expectations. She wanted it to feel as quiet and genuine as their encounter. She slid the letter into an envelope, addressed it by hand, and placed it in the outbox. For the first time in months, Celeste felt something stir beneath the surface of her usual executive stillness. Anticipation. 3 days later, in the middle of an early spring rain, Sawyer stood at the motel's front desk, retrieving a small bundle of mail. Bills, flyers, and one handwritten envelope, addressed simply, Mr. Sawyer Quinn. He opened it in their room, while Lila drew on the window glass with her finger. As he read the letter, his brow furrowed, then softened. He didn't recognize the name at first, but the words brought back everything: the soft tremble in her voice, the necklace, the look in her eyes. "You okay, Dad?" Lila asked, peering over. He nodded, passing her the letter. "It's from the woman on the plane." Lila read silently. Her lips moved just a little as they traced the words. When she finished, she looked up with wide eyes. "She wants us to go visit her airline." Sawyer smiled. "Looks that way." "Can we go?" He hesitated. "I don't know, Lila. She might be, well, someone important." "We're just—" Lila cut him off. She didn't say that. She said, "You're important." And I gave her a cookie. So maybe that counts for something. Sawyer laughed. "You're really not afraid of anything, are you?" She shrugged. "Not when there are cookies involved." The next morning, dressed in his cleanest button-down and jeans, Sawyer held Lila's hand as they stepped into the Ren Air Outreach Center. It was a newly renovated space just off Park Avenue, surprisingly warm despite the corporate glass exterior. They were greeted not by a receptionist, but by Celeste herself, dressed in slacks, a soft blue sweater, and no necklace this time. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw them. "Mr. Quinn." "Lila," she said, voice gentle like someone greeting old friends. "Please," Sawyer said. "Just Sawyer." She extended her hand. "Celeste." Lila grinned. "I remember you. You were sad." Celeste's eyes shimmered. "Yes, I was." Lila tilted her head. "Are you better now?" Celeste knelt down, looked Lila in the eyes, and smiled in a way that cracked open something sacred inside her. "I think I'm getting there," she whispered. And for the first time in a very long time, she believed it. The outreach center didn't look like the kind of place where policies were made. There were no marble floors or suits pacing with clipboards. Instead, soft light spilled from warm pendant lamps, and the walls bore framed drawings from children across the country, crayon-colored dreams of airplanes, smiling clouds, and stick-figure pilots waving from the sky. Sawyer looked around, slightly stunned. "This doesn't feel like an airline headquarters." Celeste smiled. "It's not. It's what I wish headquarters felt like." Lila had already wandered to a low table in the corner, where colored pencils and wooden airplane kits sat in neat baskets. "Is this where you build kindness?" she asked innocently, holding up a wooden wing. Celeste knelt beside her. "We try to. One little piece at a time." Sawyer watched them from a few feet away, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Celeste wasn't what he had expected. She had no clipboard, no assistant trailing behind her, and none of the polished veneer of a CEO. If anything, she looked lighter, even when her eyes still carried something unspoken. "How did you even find us?" he asked finally. She straightened, brushing sawdust from her hands. "You used your real name when you booked the flight. Most people don't think that's brave. But nowadays, it is." He raised an eyebrow. "You tracked us down from a plane ticket." "And a drawing," she added with a soft laugh, pulling Lila's sketch from her pocket. "I've had this on my desk all week. I think it's the most honest thing anyone sent me in years." Sawyer took the paper, a little surprised to see it again. "You know she doesn't do that for just anyone." "She doesn't have to," Celeste replied. "Once is enough to change someone." They stood in quiet for a moment. The air between them felt like something that had been paused rather than empty, like a conversation halfway written. "I read about you," he said, finally. She looked over, wary but curious. Celeste Renford. Ren Air. Forbes' most influential woman in aviation. 2 years running. She gave a small shrug. "Sounds impressive until you realize influence doesn't always equal impact." Sawyer leaned against the wall. "I don't know. That cookie meant a lot. That made her laugh, the sound catching even her off guard. "Thank you," she said, "for not making it about who I am." He looked at her seriously. "I don't think that's who you are." The rest of the morning passed in quiet collaboration. Celeste introduced them to the SkyKind Initiative, a pilot program focused on integrating compassion, first training for flight crews, providing space for passengers, dealing with grief or anxiety, and even offering legacy flights to honor lost loved ones. "I want it to feel human again," she said, looking around at the unfinished mock cabin they were designing together. "Flying used to mean something. Now it's a transaction. But if someone remembers your name after you land, that's the real miracle." Lila sat at a workbench, painting a tiny cardboard airplane lavender. She hummed while she worked, completely unaware that two grown-ups nearby were circling the edges of something they didn't yet know how to name. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Celeste walked Sawyer into the back workshop, where volunteers had started reconstructing a vintage airline cabin from the 1960s. The wooden frame was still bare, the seats missing cushions, the floor a patchwork of planks and exposed bolts. "I haven't been in a place that smells like sawdust in years," Sawyer said, inhaling with an unexpected kind of nostalgia. "My dad was a mechanic," he added. "I used to help him restore old Jeeps before I ended up in aerospace." Celeste handed him a sanding block. "Want to help smooth this armrest?" "It's been through 4 decades of elbows." He grinned. "That's the kind of wear I trust." They worked side by side for a while, not talking much, just the quiet rhythm of sanding and breath wood and memory. Sawyer glanced over. "Why did you come back here?" "To this project, I mean. It's a long way from boardrooms and press conferences." Celeste paused, then set the sanding block down. "My mother," she said quietly. She was a flight attendant for over 20 years. Before the suits, before the IPO, she used to say flying was a kind of service, not just travel, that you never knew what someone was carrying when they boarded a plane. She looked up, her eyes glistening. "She died before I could say goodbye. I missed her last call." Sawyer exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry. She raised me to believe people come first. I forgot that somewhere along the way." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She could feel the gravity in his silence. Then he added, "You remembered." She smiled almost brokenly. "Because of you." He met her gaze. "It wasn't me. It was Lila." "That's not true," she whispered. She offered a cookie. "You gave your seat. You didn't know who I was, and it didn't matter." He shrugged, looking down at his hands. Seemed like the right thing. "It was," she said softly. As they walked back into the main area, Lila ran up, proudly holding a balsa wood airplane she had built. "Look, it flies," she declared, tossing it gently across the room. It glided in a perfect arc before landing in Celeste's open palm. Sawyer raised an eyebrow. "Not bad." Celeste looked down at the tiny plane. "Built to fly, huh?" Lila nodded. "Even the smallest ones are." Celeste met Sawyer's eyes again, and something passed between them, tentative, unspoken, but undeniable. Like wings catching wind, the morning of the SkyKind press unveiling began with rain-fat, heavy drops that slicked the Manhattan sidewalks and glazed the windows of Renair's Outreach Center in a silvery blur. It was the kind of weather that muted even the most determined New Yorker, turning horns into hushed echoes and footsteps into distant whispers. Inside, however, the atmosphere buzzed with preparation. Sawyer adjusted Lila's collar while she examined her reflection in the full-length window. "Do I look like someone who builds good airplanes?" she asked seriously. He grinned. "You look like someone who could redesign the whole sky." She gave a thoughtful nod, satisfied. Celeste stepped into the room, just then dressed simply in a navy blouse and slate-gray slacks. No makeup beyond a soft lip color. No pearls. Her hair was loosely pinned one strand, falling just enough to make her look almost unfinished in the most human way. "You both ready?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Sawyer gave a light shrug. "We're not used to being on a stage." "Good," she replied. "Neither is kindness. That's why it matters when it shows up." Outside, a small gathering of press and staff had started to form under a canopy. Cameras were being arranged. A podium waited. Sawyer watched it from the window, his jaw tightening slightly. Celeste noticed. "You don't have to speak, you know." He nodded. "I know, just not sure what it's all for anymore." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean it started with a seat, a cookie, something simple. Quiet. And now there are cameras and corporate logos. It feels like maybe this is too much." Her smile faltered for a beat. "Do you think I'm using it?" she asked. He looked at her surprised. "What, this moment? Your story. Do you think I'm turning it into a product?" The silence between them stretched. Lila wandered toward the hallway, sensing the grown-up weight in the room. Sawyer ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what I think. I just know I didn't do it to be part of anything. And I don't want Lila caught in something she doesn't understand." Celeste's posture straightened subtly but noticeably. "Neither do I. But this isn't about selling something, Sawyer. It's about remembering how much people still need gentleness." He looked at her, the warmth in his voice dimming just slightly. "Do they need it? Or just the idea of it?" Before she could answer, Mia rushed in, phone in hand. "Celeste," she said urgently, "we've got a problem." Celeste turned, her professional instincts snapping back. "What is it?" Mia hesitated. "There's a leak. Someone tipped off the media that you flew incognito in economy, that Sawyer gave up his seat. There's talk online now about whether the whole thing was a setup." Sawyer's eyebrows lifted. "Are you serious?" Mia nodded, scrolling. "Headlines are calling it a PR stunt cloaked in compassion. Some are asking why a CEO would be traveling coach, or whether Lila is an actor. One article even accused you of scripting the drawing." Celeste turned pale. Sawyer stepped back, instinctively wounded and wary. "Did you?" He stopped himself. "Did you set this up somehow?" Her eyes flashed, not with anger, but disbelief. "You really think I would manipulate your daughter like that?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "I barely know who you are." That struck deeper than either of them expected. Celeste swallowed, her voice low. "I didn't leak anything. I haven't told a soul about what happened on that flight outside this building." "Then who did?" They stood across from each other, the warmth of the past few days suddenly chilled. Sawyer looked toward the exit. Maybe this was a mistake. Celeste's breath caught, but she didn't stop him. He turned to Lila, who had just returned from the hallway, holding a cup of water and a paper airplane. "Come on, sweet pea," he said. "Let's go." Lila blinked. "But I haven't shown them my Sky Kind badge. We'll make one at home." She looked confused, but followed. Celeste watched them leave, her throat burning with words she didn't know how to say. The door clicked shut. The rain outside turned harder. Later that night, the press event was canceled. Celeste stood in the now empty outreach center, still dressed from the morning. The badge Lila had made sat alone on a table, her name written in bright purple crayon, with 2 hearts instead of dots over the eyes. Celeste picked it up, held it in her palm. So small, so sincere. She thought of the girl's question just days ago. "Are you better now?" She didn't know anymore. Maybe she wasn't. Across town, Sawyer sat on the edge of the motel bed, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. Lila was curled beside him, unusually quiet. "Was it my fault?" she asked, after a long stretch of silence. Sawyer looked up, startled. "What number, sweetheart? Why would you say that?" "Because I drew the picture. And I wrote the letter. Maybe I shouldn't have. He pulled her into his arms, heartbreaking. No, you did everything right, he whispered. You told the truth. That's never wrong. She rested her head on his chest. I liked her. I did too. At that same hour, Celeste opened her laptop and stared at the Sky Kind file. The screen blinked with drafts approvals and marketing templates waiting for her decision. She closed them all, then opened a blank document. Subject, line 1. Last flight to Sawyer Quinn. Dear Sawyer, you were right to walk away. Kindness isn't meant for cameras. I see that now. But I also know one thing. If the world misunderstands us for doing the right thing quietly, that doesn't make the right thing any less true. You gave me your seat that day. I didn't know your name, your story, or how much it would change me. Now, all I ask is, would you give me one more chance, not as a CEO, but as someone trying to be real again. No press, no stage, just us. Celeste. She hit send, then closed her laptop and whispered to no one. Please, let this still fly. The email came through just after 6 a.m. Sawyer read it twice, then a third time, sitting quietly on the edge of the motel bed while the early light pushed through the slats of the window blinds. The rain had passed during the night, but the sidewalks still glistened like the world had wept and was now quietly asking for forgiveness. He hadn't expected her to write. He hadn't expected to feel anything at all. But he did. Not anger. Not guilt. Something closer to ache. Beside him, Lila stirred. Is it morning? She mumbled, rubbing her eyes with the heel of her hand. It is, he said. Barely. She blinked, then looked at him. Are we still mad at her? Sawyer exhaled a slow breath. I don't know if I ever really was. Lila rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling. You know what I think I usually do. She grinned faintly. I think she's one of those people who forgets what her heart sounds like until someone reminds her. He looked at her. That what your cartoons tell you? Nope, she said. That one's mine. That afternoon, Sawyer stood outside the Renair Outreach Center again, staring up at the modest signage. It looked different now, less polished, more vulnerable somehow. He wasn't sure if it had changed or if he had. The front door opened before he could knock. Celeste stood there in jeans and a loose flannel shirt sleeves rolled no makeup. Her hair was pulled into a messy twist, one loose strand tucked behind her ear. She looked like she hadn't slept much. She also looked relieved. Hi, she said simply. Hi. They stood in silence for a breath, maybe two. Then Sawyer stepped inside. She led him into the back room, the same makeshift cabin they'd been building days before. The scent of sawdust and coffee still lingered. A small workbench was cluttered with pieces of foam cushion fabric swatches and an open toolbox. No press this time, she said softly. I noticed. He sat on the edge of one of the wooden bench frames. You wrote something real. I meant it. I know. They both looked around the room as if it might answer the questions hanging between them. Finally, Celeste said, I didn't ask for that leak. I don't know who did. But I regret not protecting you better. Sawyer gave a slow nod. I don't think it was malice. I think the world just has a habit of trying to sell what should be sacred. Her eyes met his, full of something raw. I miss sacred. He nodded again, his voice low. So do I. They worked quietly for a while, each sanding an armrest in rhythm. The silence between them felt less like a wall and more like a pause space carved out for something honest. I always thought grief was loud, Celeste said after a while. But it's not, is it? Sawyer stopped sanding, resting his hand on the smooth edge of the bench. No, he said. It's the quiet that gets you. The space where someone used to breathe. Celeste's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I missed her last call," she whispered. She left a voicemail. I haven't listened to it. I keep telling myself it'll be easier tomorrow. Sawyer didn't press her. He just said, "You don't have to do it alone." She looked down. "I've done most things alone for so long, I forgot I had a choice." Sawyer hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. It was the letter she'd written him. "I keep things that matter," he said quietly. "This one does." Her fingers trembled slightly as she took it. Why, she asked. Because no one's ever thanked me for just being. Later that day, Lila arrived with Mia, who had offered to pick her up from the Science Museum. She burst through the doors holding a small foam glider, painted purple and gold. Guess who won the longest flight she called out? Sawyer raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. The girl with sky-colored sneakers." Lila nodded proudly, then turned to Celeste. "Did you fix the plane yet?" Celeste blinked. "Which one?" "The one between you and my dad." Sawyer choked on a laugh. Celeste knelt beside Lila. "We're working on it. It's taking a little longer than expected." Lila handed her the glider. "It flies straight." "I checked. You just have to trust the wind." Celeste took the tiny plane, looking at it, as if it were made of crystal. Then she looked at Sawyer. "I'd like to try again," she said. "No audience, no initiative, just you, me, and maybe a few broken seats to fix." Sawyer stepped closer. "Start with dinner," he offered. She smiled. "Only if you don't make it a press release. No promises," he said. "I write great Yelp reviews." They laughed. Really laughed. That evening, after the outreach center had emptied and the lights dimmed to a gentle glow, Celeste walked to her office and sat alone. She pulled out her phone, stared at the voicemail notification. She pressed play. Her mother's voice came through soft and slow. "Hi, honey. I don't know if I'll still be here when you land, but I just wanted to say, you were always enough, even on your worst days. Especially then. Don't forget who you are. The world will try to change you, but remember you've got the sky in your blood. And you know how to fly." Tears spilled down Celeste's cheeks, soundless and pure. Down the hall, Sawyer waited with 2 cups of coffee and a bag of takeout. He didn't know why he brought the second cup, only that something told him she'd finally be ready to sit with him a while. The auditorium was modest, tucked inside a repurposed hangar at the edge of Queens. Its walls still bore faint outlines of rivets and faded flight markings, like echoes from another era. Rows of folding chairs lined the floor beneath soft string lights, and a small platform had been set up at the front. It was the inaugural day of the Skykind Family Day, a new community event, born from an idea, a cookie, and a moment of undeserved grace at 30,000 feet. Sawyer sat near the back, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, his eyes fixed on the stage. His flannel shirt was tucked neatly into jeans, and his boots still carried the dust of the workshop from that morning. In his hands was a small paper airplane, lavender, with gold stars hand-drawn on the wings. Beside him, Celeste sat quietly. She wore a pale gray sweater sleeves, slightly too long, her hands curled in her lap. She hadn't spoken much since they arrived, but her presence radiated something different now, not control or performance, just calm. At the front of the room, a staff member stepped up to the microphone and tapped it gently. "Good afternoon, everyone. Today we welcome a very special young lady to share a few words. She's 10 years old, but we're told she's wise beyond all of us combined." Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Sawyer leaned forward, a familiar tension blooming in his chest. Then Lila Quinn stepped onto the platform. She wore a dress she had chosen herself, a simple blue cotton thing, with clouds stitched along the hem. Her braid was a little crooked. Her sneakers were mismatched. She looked perfect. Celeste leaned closer and whispered, "She's braver than I ever was." Sawyer nodded, his eyes fixed on his daughter. She always has been. Lila took a moment looking out at the crowd with a seriousness that belied her age. She held no notes, just the same paper airplane her father had given her before she walked up. "Hi," she began. "My name's Lila. I don't like talking in front of people, but I like airplanes, so this is okay." A few gentle chuckles. She continued. "I built my first plane with my dad when I was 5. It was made of cereal box cardboard and too much tape. It didn't fly very well. But we tried again and again until it did." She paused, holding up the lavender plane. "This one's different. This one's made of paper and wishes." She looked toward the audience, her voice growing steadier. "A while ago, my dad gave up his seat for someone. I gave her a cookie. We didn't know her name. She looked like someone who needed space to breathe." Celeste's hand slowly tightened around her own wrist. Later, Lila continued. "We found out she was a big deal, like very big, but she didn't act big. She acted real." The audience was still. Sometimes adults forget what it's like to be scared, or small, or lonely. But kindness helps you remember. She held up the airplane again. "Dreams are like this. They don't always fly straight. But if you throw them with your whole heart, they'll land where they're supposed to." She stepped forward and handed the plane to a child sitting in the front row, a boy about her age, his left leg in a brace. "Here," she said. "Try this one. It already knows how to fly." Applause erupted, warm and unforced. Sawyer stood quietly. He didn't clap. He couldn't. His hands were too busy wiping his eyes. Celeste remained seated, her gaze locked on the girl who had once given her a cookie and now handed strangers courage like folded paper. Later, after the chairs were being stacked and the lights dimmed, Lila found Celeste alone by the edge of the platform. "Did I do okay?" she asked. Celeste turned her eyes glassy. "You did more than okay." Lila fidgeted. "I was scared." Celeste knelt. "That's what made it brave." Lila tilted her head. "Do you still miss your mom?" Celeste's voice cracked. "Every day. My dad says missing someone is like a song you can't stop humming." Celeste smiled through the ache. "He's not wrong." Lila reached into her small satchel and pulled out something folded. "I made you one too." She handed Celeste a second airplane, this one white with a gold heart drawn on one wing. "Thanks for letting me talk," Lila said. "And for not making it weird?" Celeste laughed gently. "Thank you for reminding me how to fly." Out in the parking lot, the sun was beginning to set. The pavement steamed slightly as it dried from the morning's rain, and the city skyline blinked softly in the distance. Sawyer stood beside his truck, leaning against the driver's door. Celeste approached slowly, the white airplane in her hand. "She's something else," she said. He looked at the paper plane, then at her. "She has good instincts." Celeste hesitated, then said, "I meant it about trying again. Not the press, not the projects, just life. With someone who makes you want to stay grounded even when you could fly away." Sawyer considered that the weight of her words settling in his chest like something familiar. "You know," he said, "for someone who built an empire in the sky, you're pretty down to earth." She smiled. "I had help." There was a pause. Then he reached into the truck and pulled out a folded flannel blanket. "I was thinking," he began. "Yes, dinner's overrated. Want to sit on the hood and watch the city blink." She looked at the blanket, then at the man who had given up a seat and ended up giving her back her voice. "Yes," she said, "but only if there's terrible coffee involved." "Always," he grinned. They climbed onto the hood together, Lila soon joining them with a half-eaten granola bar and a sketchbook. Above them, a plane traced a faint line across the darkening sky. Celeste pointed. "Where do you think it's going?" Sawyer leaned back, letting the stars begin their slow arrival. Hopefully, he said someplace real. Celeste had never lingered in airports before. To her, gates were tools, functional junctions, where efficiency trumped emotion. But this time, standing just beyond security at Terminal 3, watching travelers move like currents through a river of glass and fluorescent light, she saw something else. She saw families holding hands, military reunions, old couples adjusting each other's scarves. She saw people arriving, returning, waiting with hope, not haste. Sawyer stood beside her, a quiet pillar in the flow of movement. He held 2 coffees, both slightly overfilled. Lila had wandered off to admire the giant rotating globe near Gate 27, her sketchbook in hand, narrating an imaginary flight path for a flamingo-shaped aircraft. "I used to live in places like this," Celeste said, taking her cup. "Airports, hotels, tarmacs. I measured my life in takeoffs and board meetings." Sawyer glanced sideways. "Sounds lonely?" "It was," she said simply, "but I was always good at pretending it wasn't." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. She could feel the silence wrap around her like understanding. They walked together past the boarding gates, pausing near a window where a Renair jet idled on the runway, nose pointed toward the horizon. "Do you miss it?" Sawyer asked. The pace, the pressure. Being the name on the tail of the plane, Celeste traced the rim of her coffee cup with her thumb. "I miss believing I was making something that mattered," she said. "But I've come to realize sometimes meaning isn't made in headlines. It's made in the way a child folds a paper airplane." He smiled softly. "She talks about you, you know." "Lila. She thinks you're the kind of person who's still becoming." Celeste looked up. "What do you think?" He met her eyes. "I think you gave away a little power to find something real. That takes more than courage. It takes humility." The intercom above them buzzed to life. "Final boarding call for Flight 1822 to Charlotte Gate 16. They both looked up, momentarily distracted by the pageantry of travel. Then Sawyer reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded flyer, worn soft at the edges. It was the Sky Kind pilot program brochure, still marked with Lila's purple stars and a coffee stain in the corner. "She wants to keep doing it," he said. "Lila, the kindness things, I'm glad. But I don't want her growing up thinking kindness has to be branded or broadcast to matter." Celeste nodded slowly. "Neither do I, which is why I've been thinking of stepping back." Sawyer blinked. "From Renair. From running it," she clarified. "From needing to be its name. I've already asked the board to begin the transition. I'll still be involved, but from the ground, not from 35,000 feet." Sawyer looked out the window again. "You sure?" I think she said for the first time. "I'm ready to land." That evening, the Outreach Center held a quiet gathering for the Sky Kind volunteers and families. There was no press, no stage, no sound system, just folding chairs, homemade cupcakes, and paper lanterns hung along the ceiling like soft constellations. Celeste arrived late, having stopped to visit the Community Aviation Museum, where her mother's photograph now hung near the entrance. Viola May Renford, mid-laugh in a black and white shot, pushing a snack cart down an old 727 aisle. She had whispered, "I'm trying Mom," before leaving. At the gathering, she found Sawyer helping hang one last lantern standing on a chair that wobbled just enough to concern anyone but him. "You're either brave or careless," she called up. He looked down, grinning. "Both, depending on who's watching." Lila spotted her a second later and rushed over holding a small envelope. "This is from everyone," she said, handing it over. Celeste opened it carefully. Inside was a card with dozens of names. Kids, parents, volunteers, all signed beneath the words, "Thank you for leaving the gate open." Her throat tightened. She looked around at the simple room filled with lives she might never have met, had it not been for a moment of collapse in an airplane aisle and the man who had stepped aside without knowing the world he was about to change. Later, as the crowd thinned and Lila curled up on a beanbag with a half-eaten cupcake, Celeste walked with Sawyer out onto the center's small back deck. The stars had come out timidly faint behind the city's glow. "I was thinking," she said quietly, "that maybe this doesn't have to end here." Sawyer looked up. No, I mean this." She gestured to the space between them, us finding each other, not because we planned it, but because we happened to show up on the same day, in the same place, with a little too much hurt and not enough sugar in our coffee. He chuckled. "I didn't think you remembered that." "I remember everything." They stood side by side for a moment longer, before she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small object. It was the first cookie wrapper Lila had tucked into her palm on the plane. The paper was folded like origami, now a delicate bird. "I keep things that matter too," she said, placing it in his hand. He looked at it, then at her. "I don't know where this goes," he said honestly. "I don't know if I'm ready for something big again." Celeste smiled, patient and real. "Then let's keep it small, one flight at a time." Sawyer reached out and gently took her hand. "No boarding pass needed," he asked. "Just trust," she replied. And they stood together beneath the faint glow of lanterns and stars, the gate behind them open, not just in structure, but in heart. 6 months later, the world moved slower. Not in the way of delay or hesitation, but in the deliberate, attentive way things do when people finally learn to breathe again. In a quiet suburb of New Jersey, a converted hangar that once stored retired planes now bore a hand-painted sign, "Sky Kind Community Flight Center." It wasn't flashy, it didn't make headlines, but it made meaning. Inside, volunteers taught kids how to fold paper wings and build model cockpits. Grieving parents came to write letters to loved ones and release them into the wind. Former pilots mentored teens with wide eyes and bigger dreams. At the heart of it, 3 people remained the quiet engines: a widowed engineer, a former CEO with no pearls and no armor, and a child with pockets full of crayons and courage. On a Thursday afternoon, Lila stood in the middle of the classroom, holding a clipboard, almost as tall as she was. "Okay, everyone," she announced. "Before we test your gliders, please remember the Sky Kind rule. You fly your best, not your farthest." "Got it." A sea of small hands waved in agreement. Sawyer stood by the doorway, leaning against the frame arms, crossed and smiling as he watched her. "You know she runs this place now, right?" he said to Celeste, who had just returned from restocking the supply bins. "She always did," Celeste replied, brushing her hands clean. "We just didn't know it yet." She walked over her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, sleeves rolled no title following her, just the scent of sawdust and vanilla. "She's fearless," Sawyer said, eyes still on his daughter. "She's you," Celeste answered, but with more glitter. They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that comes not from punchlines, but from peace. Later that evening, after the children had left, and the sky had turned a soft gold, behind the chain-link fence surrounding the old airfield, Celeste stood alone inside the refurbished 727 cabin exhibit. The seats had been lovingly restored. Each one bore a brass plate with names, donors, flight staff, and passengers who had inspired the project. But one seat remained different. 24B. She approached it slowly, her fingertips brushing the curved plastic of the armrest. A small plaque had been screwed into the backrest. It read, "In memory of the moment that changed everything. Thank you for your seat." CW. She sat in it, and for a moment the noise of the world faded. In this very spot, a stranger had given her something she hadn't even known she needed: space to feel, to fall apart, to rebuild. And now, to love again. Sawyer appeared in the aisle beside her. You always sit in this one. She looked up. It's my reminder that the smallest kindnesses don't disappear. They just fly forward. He extended his hand. Come on. There's one more surprise. They stepped out onto the airfield. The light had dimmed, but the sky still held onto a last breath of blue. In the distance, a group of volunteers gathered around a small two-seater glider, one that had been donated by a retired pilot and lovingly repaired by the local community. Lila ran up, breathless and bright. It's ready, Celeste blinked, ready for what Sawyer turned to her. We figured it was time you flew something, without needing a company logo to do it. Her eyes widened. You're serious? He nodded. And don't worry, I already checked. It doesn't go above tree height. Lila tugged her hand. You'll be safe. But you have to promise to look down at us and wave. Celeste laughed. A full, open laugh. I haven't flown anything that small since you forgot how much you loved it, Sawyer offered gently. She paused, heart caught in her throat. Then, exactly, minutes later, she was buckled in helmet-secured, heart pounding in a way that felt nothing like fear. Sawyer stood below with Lila, both of them looking up. As the glider lifted light and sure, Celeste reached altitude and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The wind kissed her face. She looked down. Lila waved. Sawyer raised a paper plane and let it go. It caught a current and rose, and in that perfect moment, she waved back, not just with her hand, but with everything in her that had ever been afraid to be real. When she landed, Lila ran to her first. You looked free, she said breathlessly. I was Celeste, whispered. I am. Sawyer handed her a bottle of water. So, still thinking about returning to boardrooms, she shook her head. Only if they come with paper wings and peanut butter crackers. He grinned. And us. She met his gaze. You're the only runway I want now. He took her hand. No fireworks, no fanfare, just fingers interlacing like they'd always belonged. That night, as the stars blinked softly over the city, Lila added one last page to her sketchbook. At the top, she wrote, her life took off from seat 24B, and beneath it, she drew 3 stick figures, one with a tool belt, one with a pearl necklace turned into a slingshot, and one with wings made of paper and heart. They weren't flying away. They were flying home. If this story touched something in you, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far kindness can travel. And if you'd like more stories like this, quiet, powerful, and full of heart, feel free to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. We're building something meaningful here, one story at a time. Thank you truly for spending these moments with us. Your presence matters more than you know. Until next time, stay well, stay kind, and keep believing in gentle miracles.